Hey, welcome back. Simon Lees here again. It's time for a guitar lesson. Now this one I'm going to do, it's a pretty basic lesson really. It's something that every guitarist should know, but holding the plectrum can make the difference between being able to play something and not being able to play something. It's that serious and it's that important to get it right. I used the wrong grip for about the first 6 years of my playing, and what I found was, although my left hand was getting quite quick, my right hand couldn't coordinate with it, and it really kind of held me back, you know. So I think it's important for any guitarist to get the technique, all the techniques that you're going to use, get them right, because it'll just make the job easier. You know, guitar playing is supposed to be fun, you know, so it's not something that you should be struggling to do. Obviously, if you're trying to learn to play something that's really difficult, yeah, okay, but general sort of, if your technique's right, things will be a lot easier and you'll have more fun, you know. So right, first things first, I'll talk about beginners. If you're a beginner, the sort of plectrum I recommend is this one, and like all good plectrums, it's made by Jim Dunlop of America, and this particular one is great because it's made of nylon and it's 0.6 of a millimeter. So it's not the thinnest plectrum that he does, but it's got a decent grip. I'm not sure if you can sort of see there is a bit of kind of texture on the bit that you hold, which makes it difficult for it to slip around while you're playing. Now, if you've only just started playing the guitar, you can afford to have quite a bit of plectrum sticking out there. Normally, if you're an experienced player, I would say have as little plectrum as possible sticking out, because the more plectrum you've got sticking out, the best way to describe it is if you're holding a pen. Normally, if you're writing something, you hold the pen close to the end. Imagine trying to write if you're holding the pen there. It's going to be more difficult to control. It's exactly the same with the plectrum. So the closer you can hold the plectrum to the tip, so you've only just about got the only a couple of millimeters at the most of the tip sticking out, that's going to make life easier. You know, it's going to make the plectrum go where you want it to go. Now, to hold the plectrum, you only need your thumb and your index finger. Your other three fingers should be curled round, unless you're going to use them for some fancy hybrid picking or something like that. But generally, you want to keep your fingers curled round. Now, if you've looked at my profile shots, a lot of the time I've got my fingers out. Last year, this is going back to 2017, I tried curling them round based on some advice I'd been given, and I thought, yeah, I'll try anything once, you know, because I've been playing for 36 years now, but you know, it doesn't matter how long you've been playing, you can always learn new tricks. Curling my fingers back, it makes it easier to change your direction of your hand. If your fingers are stuck out, you've got more centrifugal force to kind of fight, you know, and you think it's ridiculous the difference it'd make from having your fingers stretched out to having them pulled back. You think, well, it's not going to make any odds at all, but it does, and you'll find you can alternate pick a lot faster, you know, if you've got your fingers curled back. Right, the most important thing, I say, use your thumb and your index finger to hold the plectrum. Now, the plectrum should go on the edge of your finger. You don't put it on the pad. You know, you don't sort of hold the plectrum this way. You hold it that way. So the plectrum is sandwiched between the edge of your first finger, and it's on that first joint, and the pad of your thumb. So the pad of your thumb goes on top. Now, to get an idea of exactly where your finger should be in relation to the plectrum, I try and get the corner of my fingertip, which is that part. So it's not the end, it's just the bit on the corner of my finger. I try and get that to line up with the middle of the pad of my thumb, so that underneath, say without the plectrum, that's kind of what it looks like, you know, so the corner of my fingertip is lining up with the centre of my thumb. What you don't want is to have your finger there, so that your finger ends up sticking out more than your thumb does. If that happens, when you're playing, you're going to catch the strings with your finger, and it's painful, and it's going to spoil the sound and everything, you know. So it's not a good thing. Now you might imagine that's not enough to grip the plectrum. It is, believe me. That's all you need. Okay, so when I sort of position the plectrum in between my thumb and my finger, what I try to achieve is that. So you can just about see a little bit of plectrum sticking out both sides of my thumb. So even with a full-size plectrum, and even with very fat thumbs like what I've got, you can see a bit of plectrum sticking out either side. So that's having the bit of plectrum sticking out the back is a good way of ensuring that you haven't got too much plectrum sticking out at the part that's going to hit the string. So that's a good thing to get sorted. The plectrum, the point of the plectrum is halfway between the joint of my thumb and the tip of my thumb. You know, you don't want it there, and you certainly don't want it there. You know, you don't want it behind your joint. You want it exactly halfway between where your thumb bends and the end of your thumb. That's where you want the point. And the point should stick out 90 degrees. So when you're playing, this edge of your thumb should line up with the strings. Let's just say that's kind of what you should be seeing. Well, it's probably a mirror image, unless you're left-handed. So this part of my hand, what I call the chicken drumstick, you know, that part of your thumb there, you'll find most of the time when I'm playing, that is actually touching the strings. Obviously, if you're strumming a chord, you know, so if I'm, you know, there's no contact at all. But if I'm just doing single notes, say if I'm playing something on the B string or my chicken drumstick is actually leaning on the fat strings there. It's not away, it's actually touching those strings. And that's what you want. That gives you a kind of stability. It stops your hand floating around in midair, and it makes it much easier to target the string that you want to pick. So that's important. You know, your strings aren't going to electrocute you, as long as your wiring's all right. They should. You know, you haven't got to be afraid of touching the strings. I mean, blimey, imagine if they were your left hand. What would you do? Just you know. So don't be afraid to get close to your strings, is what I'm saying. So with that in mind, so that's it. So basically, when you're in the right position, your thumb is in line with the strings, and I say that's why you need the point of the plectrum to stick out at right angles to your thumb. You know, so it's not pointing forwards, it's not pointing back, it's absolutely stuck out sideways. So that's it. I mean, one of my students had a little bit of difficulty with this, and the way he sort of visualised it was, it's when you're looking down on top of your thumb, your plectrum is making the shape of an arrow pointing downwards. That's how he sort of got his head around it, and that works for me. You know, whatever it takes for you to get it right. You know. Okay, I'm going to change plectrums now because I prefer a thicker plectrum, something with a bit more meat on it. So here's one such example. Now this is one of Zach Wilde's plectrums. You see, there's his signature there, and if I can get the camera to pick that up. It was donated by a friend of mine, Darren Thacker. So cheers, Daz. It's a great plectrum, by the way. So yeah, when you're, when everything's right, when you've got the grip right, you've got the right amount of plectrum sticking out. There's a lot of talk about, should you have your plectrum at an angle, or what's the best angle you should have your plectrum at? The best angle you should have your plectrum at is no angle at all. It should be absolutely flat. So when you hit the strings, and the reason for this is, if you want to pick fast. Now I'm deliberately holding the plectrum badly so that you can see what see what the plectrum itself's doing. If you want to play something fast, you need to have as little movement as possible. So if your plectrum is level with the string, if it's kind of parallel to the string, that means that you've only got to move it maybe a millimetre either side of the string, just to allow the string to vibrate. It needs a little bit of space there. So it's a bit more than the thickness of the string, but not much. Now imagine if you've got your plectrum at an angle, I've got to move the plectrum a lot further to pick the string, and to sort of pick it both ways. It's only a little bit extra, but it's enough to slow you down, So, the more movement you're making, then the more effort you've got to put in, and then the more tension you end up in your wrist, and you might squeeze the plectrum harder than you need to. So, all these things add up, and you end up basically with a sloppy technique, and it becomes difficult to play certain things. Now, one benefit you do get, say if you do tend to point the plectrum downwards, is your thumb points downwards as well. Also, sometimes you can actually bend your thumb, and that feels comfortable, and it does. It definitely feels. I find it feels a bit weird having my fingers curled round and my thumb straight. What I find myself doing is I do bend my thumb, but bending my thumb doesn't alter the angle of the plectrum. What I'm doing instead is I'm keeping the plectrum nice and level, and then just placing the tip of my thumb on top of the plectrum like this. So now I've still got only a tiny bit of plectrum sticking out, but my thumb's bent and the plectrum's still parallel to the strings. I don't know, to pick where I need accuracy when I've got to pick fast. I find that a really nice, comfortable way to pick. Finally, something, if you really want to work on your alternate picking and get your picking faster and more accurate, one thing I've found which definitely helps is to get my second finger up against my first finger. So I'm sort of squeezing my second finger against my first finger squeezing against the plectrum, and then my thumb's on the top, keeping it all together, So if you it doesn't really matter what you do with these fingers. I just keep them curled, keep them out of the way. But putting my second finger against my first finger really sort of, it makes it more solid, makes the grip more solid. And I find that then my two fingers and my thumb are locked in position. There's no flexing going on. Now I know Steve Morse is famous for being a really good picker, and he has got this kind of fish tail thing going on with his thumb. Take no notice of Steve Morse. You always get the odd famous guitar player who's got a weird technique that works, but for the rest of us, this is the best way. Having your fingers locked and your thumb locked means that all the movement has got to come from your wrist. And that's what you want. It's less things to worry about, it's less things to go wrong. So you can focus on just controlling the muscles in your wrist to make the plectrum go where you want it to go and to do what you want it to do. I will at some point. I'll do a little video about picking, but the main thing is to get your plectrum grip right. So I say to start off with anyway. The point of the plectrum should stick out at right angles to your thumb. The point should also be halfway between where your thumb bends and the tip of your thumb, so that the bulk of your pad of your thumb is covered with the plectrum. That's what you want. Don't use the pad of your finger to hold the plectrum against. Use the edge and curl your finger round. Curl your second finger round as well, and curl these two fingers round, keep them out of the way. Have your second finger against your first finger. The corner of your index finger should line up with the middle of the pad of your thumb. So the other thing that's worth mentioning as well, the way my hand is there, you see there's a gap? That's another way of checking if your finger is sticking out too far. So if you find there's no gap there, what's going to happen is your finger's going to hit the strings as you're strumming, and that's no good. What you'll probably end up doing then is having more plectrum sticking out, and then you're back to that situation where you're trying to write holding the pen at the end. So that's it. So make sure you've got a gap there. The middle joint of my index finger is lining up with the tip of my thumb. So when I look on top of my hand, what I'm seeing is a rectangle shape, or three parts of a rectangle. Well, that's the one side, that's the other side, and that's the other side. And that's what you should be seeing. So for general stuff, that's fine. I've got my thumb straight. For intense picking, I bend my thumb, get the tip of my thumb on top of the plectrum, and again, make sure my second finger's up against my first finger. Keep these two fingers curled back. And then you've hardly got to move. There's hardly any movement going on. Let's try something fancy. Try with a bit of sound. So that's the way to do it, So, that's with Zach Wilde's plectrum. Finally, these are the plectrums I normally use. You may have seen these on one of my other videos, but they're the Jim Dunlop small stubbies, and they're 3mm thick in the middle, tapering towards the edge. These are great. These don't bend at all. You could run a train over one of these and it wouldn't bend, Because they're so small, you can't see any plectrum sticking out the other side of my thumb, and it kind of forces you to only have a tiny amount of plectrum sticking out because you've got to hold on to something. These plectrums are fantastic. I've been using them since they came out in 1990, and they are really cool. So yeah, I sometimes come across players who only just started playing, and if you're not heavy-handed, try one of these. I normally recommend these thinner ones because they allow you to be as clumsy as you like. It doesn't, and they won't, they won't hurt the strings. But if you tend to be light anyway, try one of these things, because they're so responsive. They go where you want them to go, and there's no problem with accuracy. You know, they're really good. So that's my top tips for holding the plectrum. So if you're not holding it right, fix up. and thanks for watching again, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.